Subreddit, glitch_in_the_matrix. Title, My 5-year son broke character and talked to me like an adult. Body, this happened about 2 years ago and I was so blown away I took notes and told my wife about it, so I still have the notes on my phone. My 5-year son was pretty typical for his age, always goofing around, never serious, always working some angle to negotiate treats or buying whatever thing was at the top of his list this week. Kids have a selfish worldview and that's mostly understandable because they haven't matured yet. So when my son asked me to go for a walk, just the two of us, I immediately laughed and thought, okay, what's he going to ask for? We start walking and I ask, what's on your mind, buddy? He said, nothing really, I just want to have some time to be with you and be peaceful and be out in nature. Wow, okay, this is progress, I thought. Then he said, I want you to know you're the best dad I've ever had. You really do help me and my sister a lot and you're really very nice, even though we don't usually tell you. So I just wanted to say thank you for everything and that I want to be near you always. By this point, the only reason I wasn't completely crying my eyes out is that I thought it was some kind of a joke or lead up to ask for something. This was totally out of character, especially at this age. I managed to croak out something like, I'm really glad to hear that and I love you very much. Then we just enjoyed the rest of the walk. It really felt like for a moment I was speaking to a soul who has had several lives. You're the best dad I've ever had, and wanted to speak directly to me instead of play the role of a child. I'm so glad it happened and it's something I will never forget. Later he went right back to being the same old goofy kid that I love. Top comments, you're my favorite mummy I've had and I'd like you to be my mummy again next time, were things my toddler said over and over to his mom. He was a fountain of past life stories and weird paranormal encounters at that age. Or an extremely imaginative child, depending on how you want to look at it. My son, who is 4, had a few moments like this. Once when we were playing, he spontaneously said, "Hey, remember back when I was big? Like really big? Like 27. And I was the daddy. But then I died and now you are my daddy." One time during a rainstorm he was in the car with his mom. She has a fear of bad weather. Out of nowhere our son said in a really serious voice, "It's okay, everybody dies. We just have to start over again. Like go back to being a baby." And when doing some crazy gymnastic moves he said, "When you are a kid again you have got to try this." I was with a family member and he was wrestling and playing with his daughter and making her laugh. After a while he got up to get a drink or something. When he left, she turned to me and said, "I love that guy," in a really bemused way. It was such a beautiful and funny moment. Thanks for sharing, that is adorable, you almost have me crying. When my son was about 4, he asked me to go for a walk after dinner. For him it was usually a nature thing and he'd stuff his pockets with rocks and leaves, and God knows what else. This particular day we walked along silently, and he didn't stop to pick anything up or ask dozens of questions or anything. Finally, I said, "We aren't picking rocks up or chatting, why did we come out?" He looks at me like I'm an idiot and says, "To walk off the ham." Referring to our heavy dinner. My nephew is 5, and he recently started talking about who he used to be before he was born. He has shared some amazing details. His name was John, and he died in a car accident while trying to find a dog that ran away. He smoked. He had a girlfriend he called Agelia and they used to cuddle a lot. He drank coffee, she drank tea. He drove a Jeep, remembered the names of his siblings. He said he died in 1980. To me, that was the strangest detail because he hasn't gone to school yet or learned about decades. He does watch a lot of YouTube but I don't know. He seems to be okay with volunteering these details but gets a little shy if he is pressed about them. I am fascinated by his stories. Edit, so this is now one of my most upvoted comments ever. Thanks all. My nephew would love that his story got a lot of likes. Also thanks for the silver. I remember when I was a kid I had very adult formed thoughts but would not speak them out loud because I knew I wasn't meant to. I don't know, I think many or some kids have this too. My daughter is 3. My dad died when I was 17, many years ago. This reminded me of this incident, so I looked it up. I found this diary entry in my Penzu from July of 2020. Quarantine diary. I know this is stupid, but I was looking at old, pre-pandemic, videos of daughter, when she was 2, and in the videos she was on a playground and pushing a tiny cart in a grocery store, and I just burst into tears. Daughter is here with me, and asked why I was crying, and I said, I miss parks and grocery stores. And she said, where is your dad? Well, she said, where is your daddy? And I said, I don't know. Where is my daddy? I try not to tell her my dad is gone, and she said, I am your daddy, and I said, oh yeah? What do you have to say as my daddy? And she said, I love you. And I miss you, everything will be okay. She went to the kitchen, as I sobbed, and got me a washcloth. She came back and said it was for my eyes, then she said, I won't forget you. It will be okay. Then she turned and watched cartoons again, and I'm sobbing. She technically said, I don't forget you. Everything will be okay. End of diary entry. I remember now. I was just sitting there feeling so isolated and wishing I could take my daughter to the store or a playground. We are in California, and we were, in addition to the pandemic, engulfed in smoke and flames. It was a low point. I was crying and feeling so down and lonely, and then my daughter asked about my dad, then said she was my dad. Never happened before or since, then said all those things. It was like at my lowest moment he used her to try to communicate that he is here. I don't know. I am an atheist, but there is no question to me that my 3-year-old would never say those things to me. I immediately jotted the interaction in my diary as I was still sobbing because I wanted to preserve the integrity of the memory. I was certain in that moment that it wasn't her talking, it was him. A friend's grandson started saying odd things when he was 3. I was helping her with her family tree, and one evening she asked me if I believed in reincarnation. I told her I did and asked why she was asking. She told me that her grandson had started saying, when I was with my other daddy who went to sleep and got dead, I talked different and had long hair. She said he'd totally freaked them out by saying I worked in stone and then in a place with a lot of clocks. I could see how weird this was from a 3-year-old, but I was doubtful. The apprenticeship for a mason was 7 years, and you weren't likely to change profession after that. That evening I'd agreed to do some research on her tree, and I found her 7-greats-grandfather was a mason who became a famous clock and watchmaker, self-taught. To say I had goosebumps would be an understatement. She was completely blown away by it. This sounds like the kind of thing someone would say to a parent if they lost them and were able to see them one last time by switching places with their past selves. Not trying to be morbid, it's just the first thing that came to mind. When my son was 4, he was sitting in his bed, playing, as I walked down the hallway to my room. He looked up at me and said, "Hey mom, thank you for having me because I wanted to be alive." I was shocked, speechless. I believe old souls are waiting to be reborn, and so this really hit home to me, was especially close to my boyfriend's 4-year-old son. He was a gorgeous, wild boy, and I really love him as a human being to this day. Fast friends. We were laying in bed one day and he said, "Hey, I knew you before daddy knew you." So I said, "Yeah. It's almost been a year, we re together now." He said, "No, I knew you before we were married and I was killed by the bomb. I couldn't get back to you, I was too late." This is looking deep into my eyes, unflinching. He said he tried to line it up but he couldn't come back until now. That we were married and he hopes one day we'll be married again. I said, "Well, we'll have to see what your dad thinks about that. I am his girlfriend, he might get jealous." And he said, "But you were my wife." Then he just turned back into himself. I tried to ask him about it and he said, "Why are you being weird?" And then went to go play with my camera. Like night and day. I don't believe in the paranormal, but holy shit, after that I am just not sure. I really did feel an otherworldly connection to him, like we had gotten into mischief many times before. I was a lighthouse for him during a hard time. I can't help but feel he is some long lost soulmate. I want to be near you always. Now that is so sweet, and I do feel like we can be connected at the soul, always returning to each other, in the afterlife, next lives, and so on. Really cherish your time with your son. This seems like something an adult would say to a parent if given the chance to return to for a moment. Perhaps he found a way to travel back through time just to tell you this. For whatever reason. Maybe that moment you needed to hear this. Maybe his lifeline is cut short and he wanted to express something after the fact and found a way. I don't know, but always play that game of catch or whatever. Reading this just totally freaked me out. My daughter is 6 now and has been telling me about some other mommy since she's been able to talk. She actually remembered the whole other family. I didn't want to ask many questions because I didn't want to guide her, and she spoke in great detail. She told me about their house and even went on to say someone came into their house and hurt them, except for her brother who stayed the night at his friend's that night. She was 3 telling me all this. I was freaked out but let her talk about them whenever she felt she needed to. She talks about them less now but still does from time to time. She told me she got to pick me as her mom and there were other kids there picking new mommies too. Yesterday she looked up and said, "I loved my other mom but you are the best mommy I've ever had. That's why I picked you." When my son was 7 he came in from playing with a new friend and said to me in a very grown-up tone, "That kid has a very big heart," meaning he was really nice and he liked him. I was blown away. When I was a kid I was having a catch with my dad in the backyard. My mom asked me, "How do you know how to throw a baseball?" "Grandpa taught me." My grandpa had passed away a year before I was born. "When did he teach you?" "Before I came here." "What do you mean by here?" I gave them a side eye and said sternly, "Here, I 100% believe people are reincarnated." My son talks about his past family and how they died. And he has not started telling me that I wanna be his mom in the future. It's upsetting. When my son was around this age, 5-ish, he told me all about when he lived in Russia with his first mummy, with his dad, granny, brother, and little dog. Then one day the men with guns came to their house and told him he wasn't allowed to live there anymore. So he left on a boat with the little dog. He waved at his mum and granny as he left and went to live in London. He became my son because he was walking over the bridge, and then I saw you crying because you couldn't have a baby, so I came to be your baby. Isn't it weird how those situations take place? My 3-year-old daughter said once, "I'm getting smaller and you've gotten bigger, but once I was bigger and you were smaller." Once the moment has passed, it's like they've never said it. Another time I was talking to her about how much I loved her and she said, "I know," and she referenced when she was my mommy, but now I'm her mommy. My mom died when I was 8 and I definitely loved her more than anything. A friend of mine listened over to her 3-year-old asking the baby, "Can you tell me about God?" I almost forgot already.